Right, should we get on to the interview stage of the pod? Yes, I was about to the interview stage of the interview, and I was like, hang on.
So, Toby, you're going to introduce our guest, but I'll just quickly run us through. So, for the next phase of the podcast, we will be interviewing a guest, our first ever guest.
We've paid lots and lots of money to be here.
Yeah, we have.
So we are joined today by a managing director of a timber company by the name of Phil McCormick. Welcome, Phil.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
How are we all?
Good, yeah. Good.
Yeah, we're not too bad. We were just discussing our battle strategies in the medieval times.
I thought you were talking about the timber. I thought you were talking about the timber industry. Actually, there was a lot of synergy there between things that were going on that, happen in my day every day. We're fighting dragons all the time.
People being fed to crabs.
We should tell the viewers that Phil is older than me and Bobby.
Oh yeah.
he was back when the dragons were about. So
yeah, we used to supply all the timber, for those weapons that you were talking about. Where did you get the wood?
Yeah, the trebuchets.
You used to buy it off me, I think, to be honest. But
yeah, Phil's loving the war in Westeros. He's making lots of money.
Yeah, never a dull. But it reminds you how long wood's been around, doesn't it? Really,
It's true, and the timber industry is probably one of the oldest industries in human history.
Well, it's the oldest building material. I mean, that is known. That's a given. So yeah, I'm not sure there's been an industry behind it per se, but it's definitely one of the oldest building materials that's ever been used by the human race.
Definitely.
So how long have you been in the timber industry then?
I'm going to sound really old now. So I think I came out of college and went into the trade in about 1978.
Wow.
Something like that, 76, 78. So I'll be hitting my sort of 50 years in the industry in a couple of years' time, which I have to say, sitting there saying it's hard to believe because it seems to have gone by in a blink of an eye. It's quite scary how quickly that's gone by.
Like an episode jump in House of Dragons.
Yeah, in House of Dragons, just all of a sudden 50 years later.
Yeah.
How did you get started? Like, what did you?
Well, it was
choose
accidental. I think like most things. I mean, my father was in the industry. He was the managing director of a very large timber company in Coventry. But as a teenager, he would come home from work and he would actually say to me, "I don't care what you do for a living, but you're not going to go in the timber trade." Because it was a real tough industry to be in, and it has been really in my working life, to be honest. It's going to get better now, but I was dating the career masters back in the day when we had schools. We had career masters. I don't know if you still do these days, but we had career masters who were supposed to sort of get you into work. But in 1976, 78, we were in another one of those recessions where there wasn't any work. But because I was dating his niece, he was determined to get me a job. And he called me in one day and said, Jewsons are looking for some commercial trainees. I know you don't want to work in that industry, because I'd already told him the story about my dad. He said, but, you're going to leave school in about a month's time and you haven't even been for a bloody interview yet. So you better go and get some experience. Why don't you just go for the hell of it? And I went along for the interview, and I think this is a real key feature, I think, when you're going for interviews. If you actually don't want the job, if you're not stressed because you don't really care whether you get it or not within reason, you're a much more relaxed person and more yourself, I think. And I just sat in front of this guy and we just chatted and went home, and the phone rang that night and he said, we're quite interested in you. We've got a thing. We've got to send one of our guys up to Norwich and Great Yarmouth next week to pick up a car. Why don't you go with him and you can visit our head office and you can visit the port. You can see the operation, and then when you come back, we'll talk about a job. And remembering I was only about 17 or 18, and they sent me to Norwich and put me up in a 5-star hotel. Something I'd never experienced before.
Very fancy.
Well, no, not a 17, 18. I'd love a 5-star hotel.
I was in the bar and Mr. Jewson walked in, and I do mean Mr. Jewson, as in the man that owned Jewson in those days. and we got chatting, and I lay in bed, closing the curtains with a button by the side of the bed, and remote TV. This, I sound really old now. Remote television controls were a thing you didn't have at home. You argued about who got up out of the chair to change the channel, and there was only 3 of them anyway. And I remember sitting there thinking, what the is my dad on about? This is bloody brilliant. I don't mind having this sort of lifestyle. And I came back, they offered me the job, and as they say, the rest is history.
That is crazy.
Very cool.
I guess that sort of, it goes to show though, it's who you know in the world, not what you know. I think that sort of, the more I get older, the more I do realize that, like, if somebody's got like a family business to go into, you know what I mean? That's more likely what they're going to end up doing. Like a farmer's son, 9 times out of 10 is going to be a farmer.
So yeah, I think with me it was the opposite, as in I went against my dad to do it. And of course the downside was I ended up working for the company that was in opposition to his company. So that was a bloody interesting Christmas lunch, I can tell you. When that rolled round. But I think from my point of view, I think the world offers you opportunity. People say, "Oh, you're very lucky because," but I don't actually believe it's luck. I think as you go through life, the world offers you opportunities. The only difference between people who seem to be lucky and people that don't seem to be lucky is there's people who are completely open-minded to the opportunities that come their way and spot them. And there are people that are so busy, distracted, that the opportunities come their way, but they don't realize they're opportunities, or they're not open-minded enough to take them on. And that, I think, is a major, mindset issue that people need to sort of get their heads around, because my life has offered me many opportunities that I've spotted, and there's been other people in the room who didn't spot them because they just don't have the same, open-mindedness towards having a go at things and always saying yes, basically.
So with saying that, Phil, that actually leads me to one of the questions that I had written down for you today. Is what advice would you give someone in their 20s or younger of how to be more productive? Like, by the sounds of it, it's just taking every opportunity that comes, or...
Well, I think the problem is, I think society has not done anybody a favour by driving youth into university education almost as a matter of course. When I was at school, I ended up being at a comprehensive. I started off at a boys' school. They then joined it up with the girls' school next door to create a comprehensive, and that was my education over. Because the distraction was just, I was 15. I got no flipping chance, had I really? Having come out of a boys' school to suddenly have girls in the space, it was never going to work.
Well, I was about to say that's a massive shock.
Just crazy. But of course, out of my year of, I don't know, say there was 35 people in my class, the norm then was that 25, 28 of you were not going to go to university, and the clever 3 or 4 would. Now it's completely shifted round that,
it's the opposite. Yeah.
You're a bit odd if you don't go to uni. And the thing about coming into the workforce at 16, 17, is that you were thrust into a adult environment. You joined a company where everybody else in the company was 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So you were forced into an adult environment, which actually made you grow up. You had to grow up. You had to engage with that age group. With going into the sort of university route that's driven now, you don't actually start to get into the adult world, for want of a better expression, until you're 22, 23, 24. Now, by the time I was 25, I was the director of a company.
That's crazy.
Because I'd been in the workplace since I was 17. So I was 8 years, 9 years in to an industry with value. I had value for people who wanted to employ me because I had 9 years experience and a trade qualification under my belt that I took after I left school. So So I think that the stalling of people coming into the adult world has actually had a major effect, because I think the younger you are, the more receptive you are to being shown how the world works. And I think by the time you get to 23, 24, 25,
you're set in your ways.
You've got more set in your ways. You've become a little bit opinionated, without being rude to the people that listen to this. You've become a little bit opinionated, but the opinionation is not actually based on experience, real life experience. It's based on social experience or university experience. So I think whenever we interview people who have come out of university, I remember being at a London dinner, and there was a guy there that it was a very upmarket trade dinner, and everybody in the room was basically called the name of the company that they ran. So Mr. Jewson was there, Mr. Mayer was there, Mr. Hunter was there, and for years I used to go to this dinner, and I was always called Nick, because my company is Nick's Timber, and they assumed that because I was at the dinner, and my company was Nick Timber, I must be Nick. Well, Nick Timber is 168 years old, and Nick died about 140 years ago. So that ain't gonna work.
Yeah, Phil's old, but he's not that old.
But I got talking to one of the owners, and he sort of, they were all public school boy owners because they're big corporations, and he said to me, how many graduates do you employ, Philip, in your business? And I said I didn't employ any. And I thought he was going to choke on his chicken. And he said, "Well, how can you possibly run a business if you don't employ graduates?" And I said, "Because I employ 16 and 17-year-olds, and by the time they get to graduate age at 23 or 24, they're 8 years into the industry, and I start paying them on a minimum wage. And by the time they're 24, they're earning, going back a few years now, but they're earning 20 grand." I said, "You go and employ graduates who did a degree in something that's totally irrelevant to the industry, but their expectation, because they're a graduate, is that they want to earn 35.
Yeah.
Who got the better deal, you or me?" And the bottom line is I did, because my guy's a timber guy, and he's cheaper. So I think there is definitely a shift now. I feel, certainly from government, that university is not the answer for everybody, and that there is people in society who don't benefit from university in any positive way. It's just a slowing down of them entering the job market. And frankly, that's why it was created. I mean, I don't know whether you sort of understand why education was put to the fore and everybody was sort of aimed at university. It's because when I was a kid, 3, 4, 5 million unemployed was a normal figure. And no matter what they did to try and get that unemployment figure down, it didn't go down, because every year another 300,000 16-year-olds hit the job market. And government basically decided that the way to solve that was to put a break into the system, where introduce university as the norm, and then basically what would happen is those 300,000 a year wouldn't enter the job market for another 4 years, 3 or 4 years, because they were all going to go off and do degrees. And that gave the country and the government a way of getting the unemployment figures down, because you went into further education. You weren't counted. And
so what sort of degrees? So, like, you were saying how that guy almost choked on his mill when you said that you don't have any graduates. What sort of degrees would a graduate do to get into the timber industry? Because I would have personally thought it was more hands-on.
There really wasn't, and this is the thing. But they would look for degrees in. I mean, then what you must remember then is, because of the expansion in universities, they have invented degree courses to cope with people who are either not particularly academic or in subjects that like the ones that my son did a sports science degree. How many PE teachers do we need? You know what I mean? The degrees are there really just to put you in uni and to get you through. If someone comes to me having spent 3 years in uni and says, "I've got a sports science degree, but I want to go in the timber trade," those 3 years, they're not wasted, but they haven't taught him anything that is relevant to me employing him. All it shows me is an ability to learn, and that's it. It shows that he can listen, he can learn, he can probably get some work in on time. That's the only indication it really gives.
But,
So
but then there's lots of jobs where you need now, like an entry level, you need like a master's, or you need to be specialized in a certain aspect.
Oh yeah.
So in a lot of economic jobs and things, chemical engineering, I did a chemical engineering degree. You need those. It's a higher barrier to entry because a lot of jobs are more technological now, and there's a lot more specialization.
No, I accept all of that, and I accept all of that, and I go back to the original thing of out of my class, 3 or 4 people went to university. Why? Because they were going into engineering, they were going in to be doctors or solicitors or lawyers, there's always been an element that required that higher level of education. But when the masses go en masse, they're not going into those careers, they're going into normal jobs when they come out. So I personally champion now coming in and getting a trade qualification in the trade that you want to be in is far more valuable, I think, than going in and spending time in university and coming out with a degree that isn't relevant. Because what you must remember is people are still coming into the industry from school. So when you come out at 22, 23, there are 16-year-olds that have been in that career for those years ahead of you and know more than you do about that particular trade. So it's tricky.
No, it is tricky. I feel like as well, schools are judged on how many students they get into Russell Group and Oxbridge universities as well. I remember when I was in school, I expressed that I didn't really want to go to uni, and my sixth form tutor locked me in a room with a list of unis and a list of degrees that fit my A levels, and they were like, pick one because we think you're going to go to uni, and you'll make us look better for compared to the boys' school in Monmouth and in other places. So there's definitely a lot of pressures.
It all goes down to numbers, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah,
entirely.
And because Monmouth had a boys' school and a girls' school there, they were very much like keen to advertise. We got more people into Oxbridge this year. We more people in Russell groups than the boys' school maybe or something. So it was very competitive.
Well, I think once Ofsted started to do reports, and you were put in a table, of the schools that were better than the other schools by the number of O levels and A level results that they obtained, and who came out and went where. I mean, you turn education into an industry. Yeah. And now it is an industry, and the universities need numbers to come in because they need the money to run their business, and it is a business. There's no getting away from that now.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And I think that doesn't bode well for what its key function really should be, and that is preparing people for life. And I mean, when I was growing up in my school, and we had these career masters, they were brutal. I mean, they were literally brutal. They would look at your educational level and they'd say, well, you need to look at going into working for a car company on the line. I mean, they sort of aimed you at the job that they thought you were mentally and physically capable of doing. Whereas I suppose the only good thing about going to uni is if you're a late developer, and I was a late developer. I mean, I came out of school with very little really to speak of, and then I got onto a trade, got into the job, and then there was a sort of, it was just shy of a degree type qualification, but you did it on block release while you were in work. So it was a 3-year course. It was sort of 8 weeks in the year. You went away for 2 weeks at a time, and then you did work in between. But it gave you at the end of the 3 years a trade qualification. So letters after your name, just like the ones that went off to uni, you ended up with letters after your name.
Yeah.
And it was recognised in the industry as being a trade qualification. That was far more valuable to me. Now I actually lied to get on that course because
so the advice to the 20 people in their 20s and younger, just
There's
lie away, lie.
Well,
fake it till you make it.
White lies, I think they're called.
It is. Well, no, I mean, it was. I mean, you know, we didn't get diagnosed back in those days with various things, but my spelling was bloody awful. So you needed English and maths to get on the course, plus a couple of other O levels, and I didn't have English, not at a level that was acceptable for the course. So I lied, and we blagged our way all through the first year because they wanted to see your certificates to prove you got the grades, and we blagged our way through the first 12 months, and then at the end of the first 12 months, you sat an exam, and then if you got through that, you got on the second year. It wasn't until I got through that exam they stopped asking me for the certificates. So I kept saying, I can't find them. I've moved house. The dog must have eaten them. I mean, anything to not, you know. But the irony was, at the end of the third year, there was 2 cash prizes for the best students in the UK, and I came third.
Oh no!
I only came third because my tutor at college sat the bloody exam the same year I did, and he was the bloody tutor, for Christ's sake.
What? That's cheating, surely.
But he didn't have the qualification, and so when I got it, I passed with merits and stuff. So when I got it, I actually wrote to the governing body, and I said to them, look, you know, I'm going to come clean, you know. I've just finished third in the country on this course, this trade course. I've qualified, but I lied to get on it. And if you want to take the qualification off me, that's fine. But what's concerning me is how many people with the ability to get this qualification are you blocking because of the criteria that you've set to get on the course? And I got a very nice letter back basically saying, congratulations, well done. Pay your £75 annual fee to be in the Institute of Wood Science. And we'll look into what you've said. And I'm not saying it was just because of me, but about 2 years later, they introduced a distant learning year where you sat a course, you know, what you would call now online, but it wasn't online then, a postal course. And if you if you took the exam at the end of that first year and passed it, you qualified to get onto the main degree course. So another lesson there is, yeah, if you want to get on, you've got to push the boundaries yourself. You know, no one else is going to do it for you. And if you think that there's something fundamentally wrong, speak out and get it put right, because lots of people, you know, I'd like to think lots of people then got on a course they wouldn't have got on, and the trade is better off for it because we've got more skilled people in the industry. So, yeah,
I was about to
more
say,
potential.
It's starting everyone to get them more in the right direction, because people are very much like sheep. So like everyone started going to uni, so everyone started doing that. So if everyone starts doing the apprenticeships and all of that, then hopefully all of that will start carrying on. But to sort of move a little bit more back to the timber industry, one of my questions was, what are people's biggest like, obviously I know there could be a massive answer for this, but if you could like shorten the answer, like, what are people's biggest misconceptions about the timber industry?
Well, I'm not sure it's a misconception. I think people, you know, they don't think about it. I mean, you know, most people buy wood maybe, you know, once a year if you're lucky. So I don't think I think the biggest misconception is that if you go and buy a brick, that brick didn't exist probably a year ago. It's been manufactured, been produced. You go and buy a toilet seat, you know, same thing. You go and buy screws, nails, any other building material you want to mention, that's manufactured. You know, it's made. The wood that you're buying, you know, from wherever you go to buy your wood tomorrow, that tree was planted 50 years ago. And somebody has taken care of that tree for 50 years before they cut it down and processed it into a timber product. And I think from the frustration from our point of view as an industry is we don't really get the value for that effort that it takes to get that piece of wood to actually exist. And
so like, but like what I find really confusing is that, like, for example, so you've been in the industry for about 50 years now, yeah?
Yeah.
And within that 50 years, if you had planted a tree at the beginning of that time, that tree might only be half grown by now.
Depending on the type of tree.
No, it would be if it's a softwood tree. I mean, the plantation system on softwoods, which is what we use for construction material,
Right.
the cycle is between 40 and 50 years, and there's a reason for that. So a commercially viable tree trunk can be obtained in Sweden and Finland, Norway, Russia. In that geographical location, that tree will grow big enough to be harvested and turned back into money between 40 and 50 years. So the wood I'm probably selling now is wood that was planted in the years when I very, very first started in the industry.
Are those the areas where you get the wood from? So where do you get where is the wood logged?
Well, wood comes from all over the world, depending on what sort of wood it is. But the majority of the volume in the UK that's used for construction is Scandinavian. So it's Scandinavian. So it's Norway, Finland, Sweden, Germany, the Baltic states, Latvia, Russia, until we close the borders on export. And that's another story. That's had a massive effect on the industry, because we're not allowed to import any Russian material because of the Ukraine situation.
Interesting.
That's the other thing that people don't seem to realise is that 85.
So that affected you a lot then, the Ukraine situation?
Yeah, I mean, 85% of the timber products in the UK are imported. There is no real homegrown industry as such. The homegrown industry is mainly producing low-grade fencing material. That's where their focus is. Most of the nearly all the construction wood in the UK is imported. So world events affect the price, but they also affect the availability. Timber companies used to have very large yards, because when they were importing everything from that side of the world, the sea froze for 3 months of the year. So boats
in Russia.
boats couldn't get in and out. So you had to hold 4 or 5 months of worth of wood in your yards, because there wasn't a 12-month supply of material because of the seas freezing, and they didn't have the boats then that would break the ice up and allow transportation. That's changed now. So the softwoods tend to come mainly from Germany, Sweden, Finland, Norway. Hardwoods come from all over the place. I mean, Brazil, the Far East, China. I mean, the hardwood trade is a totally different element. And of course, the trees we're cutting down there are 150 to 200 years old, because they grow much slower.
Yeah, hardwood does, doesn't it? I learned that in New Zealand, because loads of their native trees grow too slow compared to the ones that British settlers brought over to build with.
Yes, exactly. Exactly right.
So what products do you produce? Is it just wood for construction, or do you produce
No,
anything else?
we as a company sell absolutely anything that's got wood in it. I mean, one of our strap lines is, if it can give you a splinter, we sell it.
Nice.
So whatever, I mean, our client base is the major builders merchant sector. So ironically, the people I used to work for, so Travis and Jewson and MKM and Hughes Gray, they're our main 4 accounts, and between them they've got probably something like 2,000 outlets in the UK.
Wow.
And anybody that walks into one of their operations and asks for something that is non-stock, so something that they don't keep in their stock range, they call us and we supply it. So we get asked for the most peculiar things. I mean, this week alone, I had an inquiry. You'd have thought after 46, 7 years in the trade, you've done it all really. But I had an inquiry come through this week, and they were looking for lead-lined plywood. And I can only assume it's something that's building something that's around something that's radioactive.
Interesting.
And we found that. We've made an offer on it, and so yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of the timber trade. There's no 2 days are the same, because the requirement is never the same on 2 days. So if you're a supplier in the industry, every day is different. Everything you're being asked for is different. What keeps it alive, what keeps it interesting.
No, very interesting.
So I know that with your timber company that you get various different requests. Is there any sort of things that you've built or supplied that stand out to you?
Well, we did. We've done a lot of stuff. So Windsor Castle burnt down, if you remember. We were involved in the supply of the timbers to rebuild that. York Minster burnt down. I better not say too much about burning down because it gives timber a bad name. But but if I tell you about York Minster particularly, because there is this. I mean, Grenville Tower in London has been a major. Without using too strong a word, pain in the arse for the timber trade, and partly because a brick, concrete, glass, aluminium-clad building burnt to the ground, and the world decided that wood was a bad idea because it burned. Well, there was no wood in Grenville Tower except for the fire doors, which actually kept the fire at bay so that people could get out of the building. But government and insurance companies have taken a negative view to the timber as a product, and it's been a real struggle. And I sit on a cross-party timber committee in the House of Commons to fight the corner on this. It's been a real struggle to sort of educate people that in fact you're wrong. Yes, wood does burn, but structurally it's stronger than steel. And I've got a photograph that I take to show people, which was Windsor Castle. And in Windsor Castle, there was a steel beam across part of the structure that burnt down. But above the steel beam was the original oak beams that made the roof. And and
they were still standing when the steel beam had melted?
There was steel structure above the original timber structure. Wrong way around. I'll get it right. We'll get it right in a minute. So there was a big oak beam across the building width, and then they built when they constructed or reconstructed part of the building. They used steel above it, and I've got this picture of this completely twisted steel beam because the heat makes steel buckle and bend. That had fallen from the roof and landed across the oak beam that was still strong enough to take the force of it hitting it, and actually this steel beam is balanced across the oak beam that was originally in the building. And the reason for that is that as wood burns, it chars.
Yeah, it chars, doesn't it? So it actually
and the outer
becomes
layer
hard.
of char stops the inside bit getting burnt. So
Yes.
the integral center of the product remains strong, even though the face of it would appear to be burning and charring. So, we've got a lot of education going on at the moment on timber, because the other thing that's coming down the road at us is carbon.
Yep.
The whole global warming scenario, and there's certain people out there that say, "Oh, you mustn't cut a tree down because we need them because of carbon, and it's wrong to cut trees down." I absolutely concur that it is wrong to clear fell the Amazon rainforest. No, we shouldn't do that. But for every tree the timber trade cuts, we plant 4.
Interesting.
And there is a lifespan within a tree. And I go out and talk to kids in schools, and they're very, very brainwashed into you don't cut trees down. They're very brainwashed into the whole, you mustn't cut trees because of global warming.
I do have a question that me and Bobby were talking about the other day that we had for you. So, you know how the trees get planted? What's stopping? Let's say you planted 100 trees. What's saying in 20 years that somebody might not just accidentally dig it up, and then you've lost those trees that you planted, but those trees have already been counted for? Because it just always boggles my mind how we always have enough wood and stuff. But
if you ever go to Sweden, you'll know, or Canada, or if you go to Canada, Sweden, any of the major softwood producing countries. I mean, I remember being on a road trip in Sweden, going between mills to visit mills, and you will drive for 6 hours down a tunnel of trees. They are on both sides of the road. The road's cut through the forest, and all you see for 6 hours is trees. I mean, it's phenomenal, and it is a crop. So they rotate it, and you can, and no one's going to. Yeah, I mean there is illegal logging mainly in India, in the Amazon, but the illegal logging is not to feed the timber trade. 80% of the illegal logging is actually for fuel, because in the countries where it's happening, the main fuel for cooking on is still wood.
Yeah.
Or they're clear felling because they. I mean, in Brazil, there was a thing about 25 years ago where, in Brazil, where the government actually offered people in the cities an acre of rainforest free.
That's mental.
To get them out of the cities, because the cities were becoming so overcrowded, and so they drove. So that the government would put roads into the rainforest. And they would literally fill the buses full of people who wanted to move into the rainforest and away from the cities and drop them off in these marked areas of an acre. And of course, the first thing these people had to do was to cut trees down to build a log cabin to live in. Then they would cut trees down to get to the ground to plant crops. And so it was almost a government-led deforestation, but it wasn't deforestation to feed the demand for wood. It was to try and get people to become self-sufficient outside of the cities. And no, because the misconception about the rainforest is people look at it and they go, "My God, it's so lush, it's so wonderful. You know, the ground must be absolutely marvelous. You know, must be growing on wonderful soil." But these trees don't grow from the roots up; they grow from the canopy down. And the soil they're sitting on mainly is very poor. Because hardwoods don't, they suck the nutrients out the ground at a hell of a pace. So after about 3 or 4 years of getting decent crops off this cleared ground, the crops start to become poorer and poorer because they're not putting fertilizer in. They're not. And of course, the roots of those trees hold the dirt on the rock, the sub rock underneath it. And the minute you cut the trees down and they get the rain in the rainforest, the downpours, the dirt gets washed away into the rivers. And that's why the rivers in that part of the world are now brown and not clear.
No.
So it's now in Sweden, it's a totally different thing. It's a crop. It literally is a crop. It's like planting wheat. It's just a 40-year cycle before you cut it down. So the trees are they're planted at certain distances apart. That forces growth. The canopy closes, usually in about year 10, year 12. That cuts out the light to the lower part of the forest. The lower branches on the trees die because they're getting no light. That makes them fall off. That gives you better quality wood. I mean, it's a science. It's not. And what they've found out is that the oxygen producing purpose of a tree, which is what, the whole global warming thing is about, when I'm talking to these kids in school, one of the things I say to them is, if you were to go out on the road and you were to say to your dad, I'm gonna race you, do you think you'd beat your dad? And of course, all the kids go, yeah, no problem, easily beat me dad. And I said, well, that's the same with a tree. A young tree churns out oxygen at an immense rate because it's young and it's growing and it's photosynthesizing and it's in full flow. The older that tree gets, the less oxygen it actually converts.
Produces.
Well, I guess it stops growing as much, doesn't it? It just kind of maintains itself and sequesters the carbon within itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to cut the tree down at 50 years and plant 4 young ones, you're actually increasing the oxygen produced, and you're actually putting into play carbon storage units that will, you'll cut down in another 50 years time, and all of that carbon is inside the fiber of that tree, and it will remain in that tree until that tree either rots or burns. And so to try and get to negative carbon build or zero carbon build, which is where the world seems to want to go, that's one of the targets. The only negative carbon building material is timber. Every other building material has positive carbon count.
How much carbon do you reckon goes into managing the forests? Because that's one thing I've heard where it's like, yeah, obviously wood is carbon negative. It grows, pulls carbon out the air. You cut it down, put it into a building. but then there's a lot of work behind managing the forests, isn't there? To
No,
grow
they're
the wood.
pretty much left to just they're pretty much left to grow, because the way they're planted, they become sort of self-managing.
Okay.
I heard an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about the other day when there was a Radio 4 thing on about this and about the use of wood in buildings, and they were saying, yeah, well, it's all very good taking the tree out, but what people don't appreciate is, of course, not all the carbon is in the tree trunk. There's carbon in the roots.
Yeah.
And the roots are left behind, and when they rot, that carbon is released. But that is really scraping the barrel, in my opinion, in trying to defend leaving a tree standing, when in fact the science says don't leave old trees standing, plant new ones. And they're planted in exactly the same place as the old ones are planted, are dug up. So I think we're on a win-win, and that's why, as an industry, I think we are looking forward to the problems of actually demand outstripping supply, because we didn't know about global warming 40, 50 years ago. So we didn't plant more trees then, thinking that the demand was going to go up in 2024 or 5, because it's the answer to solving global warming. So the world is going to want to use more wood because of getting to zero carbon construction. But actually, we didn't plant that much more wood to meet that increase in demand. And that's a major challenge now for my industry. And it will force the price of the product up, and it will have all sorts of effects. And of course, there are countries now who have traditionally not built with wood. India, point in case, billion people. They don't really build with timber. They build with clay.
They build with clay?
Yeah, clay. It's used clay bricks as a rule. Is the sort of so if they suddenly decide that timber frame housing is the answer, they're going to have to import a lot of wood. Canada is waking up to the fact that they've got a huge resource. America has a huge resource, but the cost of getting it. For those old enough to remember a guy called Terry Wogan. Now, Terry Wogan was a radio presenter and a TV presenter probably 20 years ago. He was never off the telly, never off the radio, earning millions. And the government about 30, 40 years ago gave tax breaks for people that planted trees. And my industry has been referring to the Wogan wood in the UK as being a resource that was going to hit us around now. But what they didn't do in the UK was to control where those trees were planted.
Okay.
And a lot of areas where those trees are sitting, you need a bloody helicopter to get them out.
They didn't plan ahead.
No.
With that.
So there is resource, but that will only come into play when wood hits a certain price, where the cost of the material coming out will meet the cost of getting in to get it out. So we're in very interesting times, and I know my dad said, as we started the interview, my dad said to me, "Don't go in the industry because it's a hard place to be." I would be saying to my son, who doesn't have any interest in it whatsoever, because he's skiing instructoring at the moment, and that's all he's really interested in.
Pretty cool.
But I would say to anybody, really, I would look at the timber trade going forward because of the carbon situation, and because of the opportunities I think that will come along as the demand for timber goes up drastically in the next 10 to 20 years.
Do you reckon that might impact the use of wood in things like construction if the price goes up and the price of like concrete remains level?
It's still by far the cheapest part of any build. It's a greatly in COVID. I mean, COVID was a bit of a window on the future, because in COVID we had the perfect storm. So everybody was laid off, everybody was furloughed. They were still getting paid. The sun was shining every day because it was a good summer, if you remember, and everybody couldn't leave their house. So anybody with a garden decided they were going to build a deck, make a shed, make a man cave, whatever. I mean, the demand for wood went absolutely ballistic, and the price of wood doubled in 6 months.
Wow.
I mean, literally doubled. and nobody stopped buying it. That didn't put people off buying it because it was twice the price, because it's still a relatively cheap building material. The price has come down again now because things have settled down and supply has obviously corrected itself. But yeah, I think there's a lot of money to be made in my. I mean, I wish I was starting out now rather than starting out in 1978. I think the next 30, 40 years, if you're in the business, there's good money to be made in this industry, whereas making a living in it for the last 40 has been, tough. You've had to be on your mettle to really pull it off. But yeah, it's interesting times.
So all wood used in timber in the UK, all timber used in the UK needs to be sustainably sourced, doesn't it? And it has certificates that go along with that, like FSC certification. Yeah. I'm just, because I review things like that at my job, I was wondering how, so do you get the certificates from the providers, and do you check that?
It has to be an unbroken paper trail.
Okay.
So we're audited by FFC is an organisation, which have auditors who come out to audit you if you are an FFC license holder. So we are an FFC and PEFC license holder. We're also a RPP license holder, which is our own trade body version of sustainable purchasing. So we're audited. So we have to have a paper trail that says when the tree was cut down and sold to the mill, it was certified.
Yep.
As coming from a certified forest. The mill, when they converted that wood and made it into square timbers, on their invoice out to the agents and the shippers, that was stating that it was certified timber and quoting the numbers through along the line. And then when the agents are selling it to the importers, that has to have that unbroken paper trail. So they follow the paper trail back to see whether or not the certification just miraculously appeared.
Yeah.
At some point in the flow. But the science has now got to a point where, a bit like DNA, we can take samples of timber, and this was really to campaign against the illegal logging in the rainforest. But we can take a sample of timber and we can scientifically pinpoint where that tree grew within about 3 or 4 square miles.
Wow, that's very interesting.
On the planet, and a lot of the logs now carry a GPS marker on it to show where it's come from. So yeah, the illegal logging situation is greatly improved now, mainly because it's being policed, it's being enforced, and if you're found to have an illegal species in your yard, all of that wood will be confiscated, you will be fined, and actually, as managing director of that business, I could be put in prison.
Okay.
How long could you be put in prison for?
I don't know. Luckily, I've never found out. But
never wanted to look.
Well, do the podcast a favour and find out for us, and then we can do like your return out of prison.
You could do me an interview from my cell.
Yeah, we'll come visit you.
But I'm aware of illegal parcels of timber being unknowingly purchased. I don't think anybody would do it knowingly. They bought it in good faith. They probably were sold it as being called something else. They didn't do their due diligence properly. It's been found in their yard. It's been confiscated, and ironically, this is what I don't quite understand. When it's confiscated, it's burned.
Oh, is it?
And I don't get that. You're releasing all the bloody carbon back into the atmosphere, but more importantly, the tree's been cut down. It's dead. You can't go and replant it.
So wait, they don't even use.
That's what I'm saying. They don't use it, but
that's even more of a waste. What?
Yeah, but it is to basically make it so painful to the person that's caught that they're never going to do it again. But if it was me, I'd be donating it out to colleges and those sort of places to use. But
yeah, like hospitals that need it and stuff like that. But they're like, no, we're just burning it.
Yeah, but So no, the whole sort of paper trail now is very, very, very tight. And if we're selling timber onto any, I mean, we've just done a delivery, our first delivery, funnily enough, this week to Hinkley Point.
Oh yeah.
And we have to prove absolutely categorically that all of that material is absolutely bona fide because it's going into a government.
Yeah, the power plant, the nuclear power plant.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, and the drivers have to have picture ID, and it's really, really tightly controlled.
I have one more timber industry related question. Just briefly, has Brexit been positive or negative for your business?
Well, Sweden sort of sit outside of the European circle, so they're one of our major import countries. So
okay,
in a way, we were already doing the paperwork outside. Where it has had an impact, it hasn't really helped. It hasn't really hindered us from the point of view of moving wood around the world. It has hindered us in as much as we used to all the plant health work on the import was done at the mills.
yeah,
Producing mills, and because now we're not part of Europe, that work doesn't qualify to tick our boxes. We're not part of the union, so we have a different. We have to do an independent health check.
your own audit on it
on import, and the problem with that is that department in DEFRA, which is the organisation that sort of plant health, farming, all the rest of it. That department had been completely wiped out during the European Union years because it wasn't required.
oh no.
And all of a sudden, wood starts coming into the UK, and it's like there's 2 qualified plant health experts in the whole of the UK who are supposed to keep an eye on, the volumes. I can't. You
Thousands of tons. Tens of thousands of tons.
If I tell you that there's 27 million sheets of plywood sold in the UK each year, and that's just plywood,
yeah,
you can sort of get your head around, the volumes that are coming in every day into the ports, over the ports, around the country. And there was 2 plant health people, so there's had to be some pretty fast footwork to sort of, capture that situation. But on the whole, we didn't really feel the bump, I don't think, of Brexit.
No, interesting.
It's but I mean, it's things like, as I said, Russia. There's certain products Russia make, birch plywood, for instance, where they probably manufacture 80% of the world's birch plywood is produced in Russia. We can't buy it. All of a sudden, suspiciously, China suddenly said, "Well, we make birch plywood," and we thought, "No, you frigging don't. You're buying it from Russia." And trying to put it in through the back door.
So what they reselling it back to Russia, basically?
Well, Russia is sending stuff to China, which is coming out of China as say Chinese product, but it's not. They're sending it into Turkey as well, and it's coming out of Turkey as Turkey product, but it's not. It's Russian. So we're having to police that very, very, very tightly. Because otherwise, what's the point of sanctions? You've got to be sort of firm on that. So
yeah,
the things like larch, which is a heavily used cladding material because it has a natural durability for about 40 years, and the Siberian larch has been a mainstay of that market for the last 20 years. You can't buy Siberian larch from anywhere other than Siberia. So that's disappearing out the market. I think I got the last lot in to the UK about 2 months ago, and that took me nearly 4 months to get that through customs. So
that's crazy.
To prove that it was actually to prove the wood was in Germany when the war broke out, i.e., it hasn't come out of Russia since the war.
Since sanctions, yeah.
Yeah, because it's called. It turns into what they call conflict wood. So we can't buy conflict wood. But I mean, even in the last month, my panel supplier sends me a price list on the 1st of the month for the coming month's supply, and he issued the January list on the sort of 1st of January, and on the 5th of January he retracted it, and he retracted it because of the Red Sea problems.
Oh yeah, Houthi rebels.
Because all of a sudden the price of a container, which all the plywood comes in containers, the price of a container that week went from £1,500 to £6,000.
How much plywood comes in one container?
Not that much. If you think about a pack of plywood is probably about a cubic 1.5 cubic meters in volume.
Yeah.
You think an average container is probably about 40 cubic meters.
Okay.
So it's it's not a lot of pack. Well, it depends on the thickness of the plywood, but it's so the price of plywood is inflated 10% this month because to take a boat around the Cape rather than coming through the canal to avoid going into the areas where they are having missile attacks, it costs £1 million per vessel in diesel more to make that detour.
That is insane. Wow. No wonder the world's having supply issues.
Yeah. So all of these things affect us, and we have to be on our mettle to make sure that we're aware of what's going on, so we move with it. But never a dull moment in the timber trade.
No, it really is an international industry, isn't it? I hadn't realised. I imagined that you just got your wood from in the UK.
No,
I didn't know.
I don't sell any UK wood except for fencing.
No. Interesting.
What my last question for you, Phil, regarding timber, it's just a quick one. Is do you know off the top of your head, like what's the biggest order that your company, Nick's Timber, have done in like a one order?
It doesn't tend to run like that. You tend to win you'll win a like Hinkley Point. So you'll win a contract, and the contract value could be, £100,000, let's say, but it will go out of your gates in £3,000 here and £4,000 there, and it will be over a 12-month period.
Oh, so it'll get paid to you in installments, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's a single order. A good order for us, would be somewhere between a single order would be somewhere between probably 25 and 35,000, which would be a sort of single supply to a major project. But when you think of the value of wood, it's a lot of volume for not very much money. So even a big job that's consuming big volume, it doesn't necessarily have a big price tag.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So it might be like physically a lot of wood, but the price tag is not as much. My last question actually is for Bobby. Because Bobby, I know that you have been quite skeptical of like the timber industry. Definitely, like a lot of your questions, sort of like regarding the environment. Would you say you have a different point of view on the timber industry now?
Well, I did know timber was quite sustainable, but yes, no, I do have a better.
You didn't. I was just sort of saying that with your questions, it was sort of like about the carbon dioxide and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think definitely timber should be explored more, and a lot of like industrial sheds, so warehouses and big industrial buildings, they use steel frames. I think maybe using combination of timber and concrete would be better for the environment. And I definitely think sort of the wider, because we use a lot of timber in residential buildings, don't we? But we don't really use timber in non-residential buildings like business office blocks and things. It's structural material.
That's changing slightly. I mean, if you want to increase if you want to increase social housing and build houses at a price more people can afford, you have to build in timber. And you have to build timber. You have to build in timber that the structure is constructed off-site. So it's timber frame construction kits that go in flat packs to be put up, and that is an unexplored thing. I'm afraid because of greedy builders. So we go to them with conceptual builds in timber. They go, "Oh, great! I can build a 4-bed house for 25% less." They build it, and then they put a brick skin on the outside of it, and they go, "A 4-bedroom house in this part of the country sells for 450,000, so that's the price." The fact that they've actually built it for £75,000 less just fattens their profit. It doesn't get passed down to the people. If they stuck to the same profit margin, they could offer a cheaper property. They don't, for obvious reasons. So the only way you're going to get social housing solved is to have a a government building company where the government own 51% of the company and control what the selling prices are. The new product that's come to the fore and was really going great until Grenville burnt, and then it stalled, is CLT. And CLT is basically building with wood and Lego. So these are, those that know the product, glulam beams. So it's laminated beams or laminated panels where the construction is actually solid wood. So they're 6 inches thick, and they come in great big sheets that you just screw together. And then you cut the holes out for the doors and cut the holes out for the windows. And the flooring system is solid wood. It isn't joists. So it's a bit like when you're kids and you're building a Lego house and you get the 4 walls up and you know it's a bit unstable. But when you get that big grey piece that goes on the top that locks them all together, you've got a sound structure. And that's the same theory with this. So the floor is a solid panel that goes on top of the walls to make it all work. Now, the highest building they've built with that in the UK is a hotel in London that is 8 stories high, and it is solid wood. The biggest structure they've built in the world is 18 stories high.
Wow.
and is solid wood. So there is nothing that can't be built in timber. It just needs a mindset change to what people are prepared to accept as a modern house. The sound properties and insulation properties of that sort of construction are off the scale because it's solid wood. So I think that is coming, and we're going to need to get that embraced if we're going to solve the housing problem.
Yeah, you don't see much of the laminated wood buildings. It seems to have been put on the back burner, doesn't it?
Well, the word is burner. That's why. Because the insurance industry have a negative view of timber as a risk. They weren't offering insurance on property that was built out of wood, and so we've had to spend a lot of time in the last 3 or 4 years educating the insurance industry to get them on board, and the mortgage industry as well, because they're both linked. Insurance companies are linked. We've got to crack that problem of what they think the risks are by proving that they're not risks. And then once that they're prepared to offer a mortgage on a timber house as easily as a brick house, people will go that way because it's a better build. But it's not easy.
I think then the only other sustainable side of wood that might not be counted is because it's international. You have to import it. You know, issues can create more emissions for certain loads. You know, if they can't go through the Suez Canal, but compared to like maybe concrete that is quarried, you know, down the road for some areas. But then obviously, like you said, it's you are solving certain issues by using wood. And it will be a mixture in the future. It won't just be 100% wood from Sweden. It won't be 100% wood in the UK.
No, the UK wood that they're doing experiments at the moment where they're trying to get UK fibre timber to be machined. I mean, the biggest homegrown operator in the UK is a company called BSW, which used to be called British Softwoods, which is why it's BSW. Okay. That has recently been bought by the German company, and the German company that bought it is a CLT focused business. So it doesn't take a lot of working out that they're looking at BSW as having the ability to convert logs, kiln dry timber, machine timber, and the logic for homegrown softwood to give it real value is to then manufacture from it with it CLT paneling for the UK. And that's coming, and that would be a great thing for the UK, because as you've said, then the carbon footprint on that product is greatly reduced because it's already here.
No, very, very interesting. Toby, do you have any more questions for Phil regarding timber?
No, the questions I do have, right? These ones are just a little bit more like Brosby talking, not timber related, and quite quick.
Go on.
So the first question is, is what's your Mackey's order?
I'm not allowed them at the moment because I've been put on this really strict diet. So
what would be your dream meal from Mackey's?
You shouldn't mention McDonald's to me at the moment. I'll be salivating. I'm probably just the old. I'm a big tasty man, really. I have to say.
No, that's a valid answer, I think. Very
Nah,
valid answer.
Big
Tasty's good.
Tasty. I thought you were going to go with the Big Mac. I thought he was going Big Mac
too.
My Big Mac crew.
Well, they don't always have the Big Tasty on the menu, so when there isn't one of those, it's definitely a Big Mac. Yeah, no question.
All right, so you know what? I'll definitely take that. Now, this question is a little bit out there, but it's a question that me and Bobby tend to discuss quite a lot, and it's a bit of a weird one. But what animal, if it tried to take over the world, would be the most scary / effective?
Phil's gonna say beavers, aren't you? Destroy all the world.
Yeah. Of course, the word beaver has a totally different connotation in different countries. You've got to be very careful where you use it, as I learned when I turned up in Canada wearing a T-shirt that said "Save a tree, eat a beaver," and it didn't go down well, I can tell you.
Yeah, beavers would be scary, but I reckon I could kill a beaver.
Well, the scariest thing I've actually ever had as a young person was actually when I was physically working in the yard. We picked up this big lump of wood. It was about 24 foot long, and I was one end of it, and the other yard guy was the other end of it. And as I put it up on my shoulder, a wood wasp came out of a hole in it and just looked at me. And a wood wasp is about 3 inches long.
Oh my goodness!
It is one shit ass sized wasp, and it just sat there because it doesn't do well in cold climates. So it was sort of lethargic, luckily. But I didn't have the choice of throwing the wood to the ground because of the guy on the other end of it. It would have broken his bloody shoulder if I'd done that. So I had to carry this thing going, and I was trying to sort of not make too much noise, but shout down the other end saying, hang on a minute, can we put this down, please?
The thing is, I would have dropped that. I would have just been there like, I'm so sorry. I thought it was going to sting me.
Yeah, we had it in a container for years afterwards. We caught it in a box, but yeah, I mean, so large wasps I'm not very fond of, I have to say.
To be fair, wasp would be quite scary. So
they would.
We do think that birds would be scary, but I guess wasps are like the smallest. You wouldn't really be able to see if one was hunting you down. Then all
Absolutely.
of a sudden, boom, dead.
True. They'll target the allergic people first, take them out.
Yeah.
The last question is there anything you would like us to discuss on the podcast in the future? So, like, in future episodes of Bros Be Talking, is there any topics that you would want us to cover or anything like that we may not have thought of?
I think, I'm really intrigued because I'm reaching the end of my working life where legacy now is a real focus for me. Trying to pass on everything that I've learned to the next generation, so that one of the biggest pressures of running a company that's 168 years old is that you don't want it to die on your watch. I mean, it would just be so painful to think that somebody had run it before you, and you were the one that let it all go tits. And we've come through recessions, banking crisis, COVID. It's not been an easy run keeping this thing afloat at times. So I'm really focused on legacy now, and that topic we touched on about, why is everybody university focused, and is there a willingness for that age group to actually do they have confidence that going into the workplace is equally as an attractive option for them? And if not, why not? Because I'd love to know what we have to change to make it an attractive option for them. Because I think we're going to be in trouble if we don't.
Well, I think people being educated on what it is, and I hope that this podcast has sort of been able to help spread the word.
Yeah.
Because that, like, I've learned quite a lot about timber today that I didn't really know. Because as you said, like, you think all the timber, like, you're sort of taught in schools, like, not to cut down trees and stuff like that. So you're like, I always thought in my head, oh, the timber industry must be bad. But like, I definitely sort of have a different point of view after sort of hearing what is put in place and how it's all done.
Well, we don't want to run out of things to sell, do we? So you know, the timber trade takes care of the world's forests, because the last thing we want to do is not have forests. So, you know, it's illogical to think that we're going to do anything to harm what your
income is.
Absolutely right. Absolutely
you
right.
also touched on. You said that you're like focused on legacy. So, if you were to have a movie of your life, who would you have play you in the movie? And you can't say yourself. That's our last question, by the way.
I don't know why, but Kevin Costner springs to mind. I don't know why I think Kevin Costner. I don't particularly rate him that highly, but I suppose.
Is he one of the cowboy ones?
Yeah, well, he's quite I mean, he springs to mind. I mean, everybody else is a bit, you know, yeah.
I could see it. I could see it.
Yeah, I think he tends to carry storytelling of, you know, not necessarily, you know, the sort of hardcore adventure type films quite well. So he'd be quite an interesting one. I mean, that's the other thing. As you know, you probably don't know, but the other passion in my life is the arts, theatre, and so forth. And of course, that's another thing that's struggling to attract the younger age group, because you are on Netflix, and you know, you don't even know. You're not.
Well, I was about to say we don't go to theatres as much, but as you mentioned about your other passion about like the performing arts, we'll definitely have to have you on again sometime, and we'll talk to you about that, because you've definitely got an interesting story within that world as well.
Yeah, I know. Never a dull moment. But to me, it's like to try and access the age group that don't go to live performance other than music. It's sort of saying to them, what do you want to see? You know, I mean, what would you come out and see? Because we've got to try again. Theatres will die if we don't do something about that problem. Because if you stand outside a theatre emptying out after a performance, other than the West End, which is, you know, a different scenario because it's heavy tourist based, but if you're a regional theatre, most people coming out of theatres these days are about the same age group as coming out of churches, and they've got the same problem because the youth isn't going into churches. So, you know, the average age coming out of a theatre probably is 55 to 65. And no one lives forever. So we're going to lose that element of life, social life, if we don't do something to make it more entertaining.
Yeah, well, 100%. Well, I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Phil.
Talking and being our first guest.
Pleasure. It's been fun.
Good. We can talk about theatres next time, I'm sure.
Yeah. Next time you've got 2 hours to spare, put me on. Thanks, lads.
All right, well, thanks very much. Take care.
See you soon. Ta-da.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you very much for listening. If you could remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, and tell us in the comments what kind of wood you'd be. And also, if there's anything that you would like us to talk about, throw that into the comments as well, and we'll be sure to talk about that. But yeah, thanks very much. Thank you very much.